In this video lesson, we'll learn about the controversy over slavery, the beginnings of abolition, and particular instances of slave rebellions. The inhumanity of the peculiar institution, as slavery was called, caused anti-slavery societies to sprout forth. Abolitionist sentiment first stirred at the time of the American Revolution, especially among the Quakers. Because of the widespread loathing of blacks, some of the earliest abolitionist efforts focused on transporting African Americans back to Africa. The American Colonization Society was founded for the purpose in 1817, and in 1822 the Republic of Liberia, on the fever-stricken West African coast, was established for former slaves. Its capital, Monrovia, was named after President Monroe. Some 15,000 freed blacks were transported there over the next 4 decades, but most had no wish to be transplanted into a strange civilization. By 1860, virtually all Southern slaves were no longer Africans, but native-born African Americans with their own distinctive history and culture. Yet the colonization idea appealed to some anti-slaveryites until the time of the Civil War. In the 1830s, the abolitionist movement took on new energy and momentum, mounting to the proportions of a crusade. American abolitionists gained fervor in 1833 when their British counterparts unchained the slaves in the West Indies. Most important, religious spirit of the Second Great Awakening now inflamed many abolitionists against the sin of slavery. Prominent among them was Theodore Dwight Weld, who had been New York's burned-over district in 1820. Weld appealed with special power and directness to his rural audiences of untutored farmers. Spiritually inspired by Finney, Weld was materially aided by 2 wealthy and devout New York merchants, the brothers Arthur and Louis Tappan, and in 1832 they paid his way to Lane Theological Seminary in Cincinnati, which was presided over by the formidable Lyman Beecher, father of a remarkable brood or family of Beechers. Expelled in 1834 for organizing an 18-day debate on slavery, Weld and his fellow Lane rebels fanned out against the Old Northwest, preaching the anti-slavery gospel. Weld assembled a potent propaganda pamphlet called American Slavery as It Is. Its compelling arguments made it among the most effective abolitionist tracts and greatly influenced Harriet Beecher Stowe's book Uncle Tom's Cabin. On New Year's Day, 1831, a shattering abolitionist blast came from the bugle of William Lloyd Garrison, who is seen here in this picture. He was a mild-looking reformer of 26, emotionally high-strung son of a drunken father, and a spiritual child of the Second Great Awakening. Garrison published in Boston the first issue of his militant anti-slavery newspaper, The Liberator. With this mighty paper broadside, Garrison triggered a 30-year war of words and, in a sense, fired one of the opening barrages of the Civil War. Garrison proclaimed in strident tones that under no circumstances would he tolerate the poisonous weed of slavery, but would stamp it out at once, root and branch. Other dedicated abolitionists rallied to Garrison's standard, and in 1833 they founded the American Anti-Slavery Society. Prominent among them was Wendell Phillips, a Boston patrician known as the Abolitionist Golden Trumpet. He would eat no cane sugar or wear no cotton cloth, since both were produced by Southern slaves. Black abolitionists distinguished themselves to the cause of African American freedom. Their ranks included David Walker, who wrote an appeal to the colored citizens of the world, advocating a bloody end to white supremacy. Also noteworthy was Sojourner Truth, seen here in this picture, a freed black woman in New York who fought tirelessly for black emancipation and women's rights, and Martin Delany, one of the few black leaders to take seriously the notion of mass recolonization of Africa. The greatest of the black abolitionists was Frederick Douglass. Escaping from bondage in 1838, he was discovered by the abolitionists in 1841 when he gave a stunning impromptu speech at an anti-slavery meeting in Massachusetts. He lectured widely for the cause despite frequent beatings and threats against his life. Douglas was as flexibly practical as Garrison was stubbornly principled. Garrison often appeared to be more interested in his own righteousness than in the substance of the slavery evil itself. He repeatedly demanded that the North secede from the South. Yet he did not explain how the creation of an independent slave republic would bring an end to the damning crime of slavery. Renouncing politics on July 4, 1854, he publicly burned a copy of the Constitution as a covenant with death and hell. Critics, including some of his former supporters, charged Garrison with cruelly probing the moral wound on America's underbelly, but offering no acceptable balm, which means he was not offering any solutions. Douglas, along with other abolitionists, increasingly looked to politics to end the blight of slavery. These political abolitionists backed the Liberty Party in 1840, the Free Soil Party in 1848, and eventually the Republican Party in the 1850s. In the end, most abolitionists, including Garrison himself, followed out the logic of their beliefs and supported a costly war as the price of emancipation. Anti-slavery sentiment was not unknown in the South. In the 1820s, anti-slavery societies were more numerous south of the Mason-Dixon line than north of it. But after about 1830, the voice of white Southern abolitionism was silenced. Virginia legislature had debated and defeated emancipation proposals in 1831 to 1832. The debate marked a turning point. Thereafter, all the slave states tightened their slave codes and moved to prohibit emancipation of any kind, voluntary or compensated. Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831 sent a wave of hysteria sweeping over the snowy cotton fields, and planters in growing numbers slept with pistols by their pillows. Although Garrison had no connection with the Turner conspiracy, his liberator appeared about the same time, and he was bitterly condemned as a terrorist and an inciter of murder. The state of Georgia offered $5,000 for his arrest and his conviction. The nullification crisis of 1832 further implanted haunting fears in the white Southern minds, conjuring up nightmares of black incendiaries and abolitionist devils. Jailing, whipping, and lynching now greeted rational efforts to discuss the slavery problem in the South. Pro-slavery whites responded by launching a massive defense of slavery as a positive good. They forgot about their own section's previous doubts about the morality of the peculiar institution. Slavery, they claimed, was supported by the authority of the Bible and the wisdom of Aristotle, and it was good for the Africans who were now civilized. Slave masters did encourage religion in the slave quarters, and white abolitionists also pointed out that master-slave relationships really resembled those of a family. Southern whites were quick to contrast the happy lot of servants with that of the overworked Northern wage slaves, including sweated women and stunted children. Blacks toiled mostly in the free air and sunlight, not in dark and stuffy factories. They did not have to worry about slack times or unemployment, as did the hired hands. Provided with a form of Social Security, they were cared for in sickness and old age, unlike the Northern workers, who were set adrift when they outlived their usefulness. Curious pro-slavery arguments only widened the chasm between a backward-looking South and a forward-looking North, indeed much of the Western world. The Southerners reacted defensively to the pressure of their own fears and bristled before the merciless nagging of the Northern abolitionists. Increasingly, the white South turned in upon itself and grew hotly intolerant of any embarrassing questions about the status of slavery in the Southern United States. Regrettably, the controversy over free people endangered free speech in the country. Piles of petitions poured in upon Congress from the anti-slavery reformers, and in 1836 sensitive Southerners drove through the House the so-called gag resolution, which required all such anti-slavery appeals be tabled without debate. This attack on the right of petition aroused the sleeping lion in the aged ex-president John Quincy Adams, and he waged a successful 8-year fight for its repeal. Southern whites likewise resented the flooding of their mails with abolitionist literature. Even the blacks could not read. They could interpret the inflammatory drawings, such as those that showed masters knocking out slaves' teeth with clubs. In 1835, a mob in Charleston, South Carolina, looted the post office and burned a pile of abolitionist propaganda. Capitulating to Southern pressures, the Washington government in 1835 ordered Southern postmasters to destroy abolitionist material and called upon Southern state officials to arrest federal postmasters who did not comply. Abolitionists were a long time unpopular in many parts of the North. Northerners had been brought up to revere the Constitution and to regard the clauses on slavery as a lasting bargain. The idea of union had taken deep root. The North also had a heavy economic stake in Dixieland. By the late 1850s, the Southern planters owed Northern bankers and other creditors about $300 million. Much of this immense sum would be lost should the Union dissolve. New England textile mills were fed with cotton raised by the slaves, and a disrupting labor system might cut off this vital supply and bring unemployment to the North. The Union, during these critical years, was partly bound together with cotton threads, tied by lords of the lash. It was not surprising that the strong hostility developed in the North against the boast-rocking tactics of the radical anti-slaveryites. Repeated tongue lashings by the extreme abolitionists provoked many mob outbursts in the North. In 1835, Garrison, with a rope tied around him, was dragged through the streets of Boston by the so-called Broadbooth mob, but escaped almost miraculously. Reverend Elijah P. Lovejoy of Alton, Illinois, not content to assail slavery, impugned the chastity of Catholic women. His printing press was destroyed 4 times, and in 1837 he was killed by a mob and became the martyr or a victim abolitionist. So unpopular were the anti-slavery zealots that ambitious politicians like Lincoln usually avoided the taint of Garrisonian abolition like the plague. Yet by the 1850s, the abolitionist outcry had made a deep dent in the Northern mind. Many citizens had come to see the South as the land of the unfree and the home of a hateful institution. Few Northerners were prepared to abolish slavery outright, but a growing number, including Abraham Lincoln, opposed extending it into the Western territories. People who believed in this were called Free Soilers, and they swelled to their ranks as the Civil War approached. And we'll discuss more about the abolitionist movement in class.